Thank you. We'll be talking about a little bit more than just dinosaurs today. There's going to be some science, some math. Hopefully you're going to enjoy it. And I think in general, you're going to see a slightly different theme to this talk. I know we're all technology enthusiasts. You've seen several talks today talking about AI models and, even quantum cryptography, things that we should be excited about, the future of technology. But this talk is going to be a little bit of a different theme, which is going to be some of the things we can learn from things in the past, things that people have already discovered, and what we should be careful about as we're taking these steps forward. So first of all, I want a quick show of hands. Has anybody here not heard about Jurassic Park? Okay. That's great. I have to ask this question nowadays because we are getting into a period where people are more familiar with this than Jurassic Park. A lot of people think of Jurassic World when I'm talking about Jurassic Park. No, we will not be talking about velociraptors being trained and, chasing people on bikes and stuff. None of that crazy stuff. We'll be talking about the original Jurassic Park. But in case you want a quick recap of story, I have it right on my first slide. So the core story of Jurassic Park is we have a park that's made of genetically engineered dinosaurs brought back through DNA cloning. And then, as you can see, we have typical malware execution. So somebody literally running a piece of code that then results in the park falling apart, the fence is failing, and then you have the T-Rex running around free, and that eventually leads to demolishment of the business. So we're going to study it as a case study in cybersecurity, and hopefully we can learn some lessons from it. Now, you might be wondering why Jurassic Park? What's so relevant about Jurassic Park? But before I get there, I want to play a very quick video. Hopefully I can get this to play. So I'm not sure if any of you recognize this, but this is one of the core themes of Jurassic Park, which is the dragon curve. It's a fractal. And we'll talk a little bit more about fractals as well. So if anybody here is interested in math, this is going to be super interesting. So there are a lot of things in the book in Jurassic Park that are not in the movies, and this is one of them. So, why are we talking about Jurassic Park? The systems of Jurassic Park were not very different from the systems we see today. So, as you can tell, it's a Unix system. And if any of you are using MacBooks, then you are very familiar with Unix systems. We're still working on the systems that were built, back then. And this was a movie from the 90s. And the technology shown here is pretty contemporary. In fact, some of it is still quite futuristic. We have a lot of automation. We have things being controlled by computers, and the systems themselves are not going to be very. In some sense, like the GUI that you're looking at here, the GUI, it's actually fancier than I think most File Explorer GUIs. And the other interesting thing about Jurassic Park is obviously the malware. So this is a screen from when Jurassic Park was effectively hacked. It was done by an insider, but we have a permission denied screen. So basically, even the people running the park were not able to access the Jurassic Park systems. Now, what does this remind you of today? Ransomware. So we've had several ransomware attacks. That's one of the core focus these days in cybersecurity, and we'll look at a real-world demonstration. But ransomware is not very different from the scenario that was showcased in Jurassic Park. Both were done for financial gain. Both were done effectively by getting inside the systems, which is commonly how ransomware is deployed. And both of them had the same effect of disabling the systems and holding them effectively for ransom, even though in Jurassic Park it was much worse because the person who was shutting down the systems ended up getting eaten by dinosaurs. So we'll get to that. So let us enter the world of Jurassic Park. So before we do that, though, one more quick note. So this is a feature that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Microsoft just announced it. It's called Recall. And there's no more perfect way for me to introduce this quote from Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. So Microsoft just announced this new feature where effectively your computer is going to be taking screenshots of all of your activity every second. It's like, so that it can visually track all of the data, and then you can search it. So you can type into your computer, like, oh, what table was there in this graphic I was looking at 10 minutes ago? And your computer is going to be able to search that. Now, on the surface, that sounds like really exciting technology, but seriously, when we don't have a working Outlook app, which crashes every 5 minutes, and it has a new plastered on it, it's literally beta software, why are we building this stuff? It's something to think about. And one of the quotes that's, one of the most famous quotes from Jurassic Park, from the books, is when Malcolm says, in the information society, nobody thinks. We expect it to banish paper, but we actually banish thought. What he's trying to say here is that with social media and a lot of the modern ways of thinking, we're used to following trends more than actually doing the thinking ourselves. So if this is the year of AI, then everybody's interested in AI. We don't ask why. Should we use AI in this particular use case? Is it actually going to be helpful? Is it a step forward? No, we just do the AI because that's what everybody else is doing. And this is something Crichton spoke about quite a bit in all of his works. Jurassic Park is not his only work. It's his most popular, but it's far from his only one. And I think this quote reflects that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the automation in Jurassic Park, which I think is also quite relevant in terms of some of the things we're seeing today. So the core idea of Jurassic Park was it could run with minimal staff for a long period of time. So up to 3 days, as it said in the movie, you can run the park with no staff at all. Just the computers. They could take care of the dinosaurs. They could maintain the fence integrity. They could run the whole thing. And that, of course, extended even to the vehicles. Now, does this seem familiar? So we have electric cars running on a track, fully automated. So again, we talk about self-driving cars, we talk about electric cars nowadays. Jurassic Park had that vision. And of course, in the end, the visitors who are in the electric cars end up getting stranded when the park goes down, and then they're rescued by gas-powered jeeps. So isn't that ironic for a movie made in the 90s to be talking about that? Now, of course, all of this started with an insider threat. So Jurassic Park had an external contractor, which also is not a very unusual threat vector nowadays. So if you've been following, let's say, the Las Vegas hack where the casino, Caesar's Palace, they were all infiltrated. A lot of those kinds of incidents start with social engineering. And often it's not necessarily socially engineering into the highest levels of the company itself, but if you can get a contractor, a third party who is, much more susceptible, and you end up targeting them and successfully, getting their credentials, now you have the potential, the attack surface is massive. And that is what happened in Jurassic Park. So you had one disgruntled employee who was annoyed that he was not being paid enough, and he basically takes money from a competitor company. We've got the classic screenshot of money changing hands here. And basically he gets bribed by a competitor to the company that built Jurassic Park. And as in return, he promises to give them the core technology of Jurassic Park. Now, this is also one of the many things we see in cyber attacks nowadays, which is the aspect of a data breach. Cyber criminals are more interested in the data that we have rather than necessarily just taking down the system. So they want to capture the data. They want to be able to send it or sell it or do something with it because the data is more valuable. Now, Jurassic Park mentions that pound for pound genetic technology is the most valuable thing out there. It's kind of true because you could literally have a single genetically engineered molecule that's worth millions to the right buyer. And that was the core concept of Jurassic Park, was shipping these embryos was so profitable, it would make him 1.5 million, 1990s, a lot of money. And that's what convinced Dennis Nedry, who is the person in the picture, to basically go through and take down the security systems of Jurassic Park. Oh. I think we have a small technical issue with the changing of the slides, so I'll try to kind of resume from here. All right, so we'll talk about so one of the many things in Jurassic Park that was very relevant is the points of failure. So we have multiple points of failure that kind of went wrong, but one of the things worth analyzing in any modern system is the points of failure, like what can go wrong and your business can still function. And this is something that's quite relevant in terms of like doing a risk analysis of any kind of complex system. Is we always like to think about, like in security, people talk about a layered approach, right? But cyber criminals don't necessarily follow a layered approach. If they can break in through layer 3, they don't really care about layer 1. And in Jurassic Park, for example, there's this really nice quote where the problems with the security system were high on the bug list, but it was never really a bug because Nedry had programmed it that way. It was supposed to be a backdoor, essentially. So modern malware tries to create this backdoor. Here it's a case of the programmer building in a backdoor as kind of like, you know, this was back in the 90s, so apparently this was a temptation that a lot of programmers had to leave a secret entrance. I mean, typically, we always complain about passwords, right? Like the default passwords on routers being username and password or something, you know, hard-coded on the box. But the reason things get hard-coded on the box are, you know, quite understandable. Because you give your router to your grandmother, and if she's going to change the password, a month later, she's going to say, I don't remember what the password was. So having a hard-coded password that you could go back to reset the router was actually quite an important feature, especially when people are being introduced to this technology. And I think it's still a problem we don't talk about as much today, because we like to think that, you know, we can just introduce more and more technology. But if people are not keeping up, then the technology itself becomes the impediment. And in Jurassic Park, again, there being a backdoor, one of the reasons that was common practice at the time was, you know, so that if somebody broke the system, Nedry being an outside contractor, he would have a way to get in and fix it. But of course, he didn't use it just for that. So let's get to the fun part. So the malware execution. So this is literally the screen where he's making the decision to execute a piece of code that's going to take down several systems in Jurassic Park and give him the window of opportunity to be able to go out there and steal the embryos. It's going to shut down the security systems. It's going to be able to go through the park and deliver those embryos. Now, what the movie didn't show you was the original code of the malware, which is actually referenced in the books. So this is the code, and in the books it's referenced as whiterabbit.obj. So it was literally an object call that was supposed to disable all of the security systems. And I'm not sure how accurate this code listing is, but basically the thing you're supposed to look at is there's a little arrow over there that says on White Rabbit object call, security perimeter set to off. So that's how Dennis Nedry basically turns off the security system. And this is something they reverse engineer in the books. So Arnold, who is the main computer engineer, decides to go back, review the lines of code, and then, you know, he finally finds the malware. Now, another thing we don't talk about as much with modern technology is unintended consequences. We always think that if we build something like, let's say, Microsoft Recall, it's only going to have the intended consequence, which is that people are going to be able to search through all of their, history. And that's rarely the case, even in cybersecurity. So I do a lot of testing with EDR. And one of the things I always find with EDR solutions, any kind of security solution that's deployed on a client environment, is every time you make a change to the configuration of that system, there's always some unintended consequence involved. So a great example is when EDR systems are set up originally, they're made to be very aggressive. So they block all kinds of malware. Now that, of course, is a nightmare if you're in IT and you're trying to get your users online. And eventually what happens is you make configuration changes. And what you don't realize is some of those configuration changes, while they allow you to get in nice and easy, they also allow the malware to get in nice and easy. So something very similar in Jurassic Park. As you can see, Dennis Nedry opening the electrified fence, no problem, with his bare hands. Turns out, if you can do that, the dinosaurs can do that as well. So this is the screen that's shown in Jurassic Park showing the fences being unarmed. And now I'm going to actually show you. I'm actually going to play the clip where all of this happens. It's a very short clip, but it kind of captures the essence of the cybersecurity disaster that happened in Jurassic Park. So here we go. Technology. See, this is the thing. We have all of this AI, sophisticated technology, and I'm using PowerPoint. I have a very powerful system, and it just literally froze up when I tried to play the video. I mean, we're having a live demo. You can't really see this, but it literally says Microsoft PowerPoint not responding. So we're having a real Jurassic Park moment here. So it's a very realistic presentation in that sense. Maybe the video's too large. I didn't realize playing 4K video would be such a problem, but let's see. Yeah. No, my computer literally froze. So all right, let's try to get it back up and running. All right. Try number 2. Classic ransomware. Even ransomware authors haven't gotten this good of a ransom note yet. I hate this hacker crap. because the phone systems are also controlled by the computers. And then, of course, the question is, where did the vehicle stop? And turns out, as in real life, it always happens at the most inopportune moment, when you're standing in front of the Tyrannosaur paddock, just like my computer decides to freeze when I'm giving a live presentation instead of, when I'm using it. Because I've done this so many times, and, this is when it decides to freeze up. So... So, as you just saw, this is what happens when, you're in front of the Tyrannosaur paddock and the fences don't work. The dinosaur is not exactly, very friendly. And this is one of the other core messages of Jurassic Park, is the element of abstraction. So, abstraction is a very useful concept in programming. I'm sure you've all heard of it at some point. It's like when you hide the unnecessary details, you make it easier for people to understand. You kind of wrap things together into, packages. So people don't need to understand the entire underlying code. They can only understand the surface level details relevant to them. Now, the problem, of course, with abstraction is that people who are working or creating the technology, who are working with it, don't really understand what they're working with. So this is the kind of dinosaur that, for example, Dennis Nedry was familiar with, and not the dinosaur you saw in the previous slide. So a lot of the core engineers of Jurassic Park, including Henry Wu, who built the DNA, wasn't really familiar with the names of the dinosaurs he was building. He didn't do any research because he was working with the DNA. He was looking at, code fragments. And that was not, understanding what a dinosaur is and what it does was not part of his job. But that led to a certain kind of decision making that probably wouldn't have happened if these people understood the real, dangers of, let's say, velociraptors and Tyrannosaurus Rex, roaming around. So another aspect of Jurassic Park that's very relevant to today is the complexity of the code base. So there are, a couple of different things. So in the books, it says, I think, 500,000 lines of code. In the movie, they went with 4 million lines of code. But that's how big the code base for Jurassic Park was. And I'm going to read another quote, which I think is going to be very... I think it's going to touch the heart of a lot of programmers here. So Arnold was no longer operating the computer. He had now gone behind the scenes to look at the code, the line-by-line instructions that told the computer how to behave. Arnold was unhappily aware that the complete Jurassic Park program contained more than 500,000 lines of code, most of it undocumented, without explanation. What are you doing, John? Checking the code. By inspection? That'll take forever. Tell me, Arnold said. Tell me. So I think those of you who've jumped into coding projects, they're huge, and join these teams, and then you figure out, oh shit, like this is what I have to work with. Well, you understand how he feels. So now we're going to get to what Nedry's original purpose was, which was obviously stealing the embryos. And he manages to do that successfully. Thankfully, he's not able to deliver them successfully because he runs into dinosaurs. But this leaves the team of Jurassic Park locked out with that nice, Nedry's face in the background because they didn't enter the magic word. So obviously, this is very similar to a ransomware attack. So we're going to talk about recovery procedures, because this is another thing that we see a lot nowadays where people are trying to recover from backup. And I'm sure you've seen the meme where it's like, oh, we have backups. Where was the backup on the server that was encrypted? So Jurassic Park had similar issues with their recovery procedures. So they had never turned off the system, so they didn't know, what would happen when the systems were turned on. And even when they were turned on, nobody was familiar with the procedures to get the individual part components back up and running. And turns out they had to go into another compound where Ellie Sattler is here, and you have to turn on the individual systems one by one. Now, the issue with that, obviously, is, under normal circumstances, there's no issue. You can just walk across the compound. But when you have velociraptors running around, it's not as simple, turns out. Again, something that, you can't really foresee with the level of abstraction that you have. So when we're building systems, I think these days it's very important to think about these kinds of edge cases and these kinds of what if scenarios, and building in like backups, and not necessarily just backups, but alternate control mechanisms when systems go down. I think ransomware is a very crucial example in this, because a lot of companies struggle with they have backups, but they have backups in such a way where it's going to be more expensive to restore from backup than to just pay the cyber criminals. That's why cyber criminals keep making money. It's because they're able to offer a more competitive price than going to a security alternative. Like if they went in, tried to recover their data, they go to an IT company, they ask for a quote. What is it going to cost for me to get my systems back up and running? And the ransomware authors know that, so they underbid that, and that's how they get paid. So it's really important to think about recovery procedures and practice them in the eventuality that something like this does happen. So obviously, this cyber incident didn't end well. That's the outcome. Jurassic Park was shut down. And now we're going to talk about a real world demo, like I mentioned. So how secure do you think our current systems are to threats like ransomware? I know a lot of you have heard about sophisticated solutions. I go to RSA, DEF CON all the time, so I see a lot of demos from vendors showing how they can detect encryption on the system, how they can block it. And that's one of the things I like to test. So we recently ran this test with a very popular vendor. Unfortunately, yeah, you can tell which one it is. So let's just play it and see what happens again. Hopefully this video will play just fine. Yep. So we're literally executing custom code that's designed to emulate cyber criminal behavior. We're going to be encrypting the files on the desktop, and you should be able to see what happens if my video is going to play. There we go. As you can tell, it's not going very well. And this is like a very expensive EDR solution for those of you who are not familiar with the market. A lot of large corporations would rely on something like this to protect themselves from the kind of eventuality we just talked about. Now, I'm not doing this to necessarily like bash a particular vendor or say they're crap, but as you can tell, let's have a look at our files here. So, yeah. So those are Shakespeare's plays, now encrypted, obviously. So one of the things to note from here, which is my point is not to talk about specific vendors, but I'm going to point out that this very same code was successfully blocked by Bitdefender Free Edition, which is something anyone can download. So a lot of the times when we're building new technology, we're not thinking about if we're improving from past implementations. Is our technology truly a better solution in terms of what we're doing from a user perspective and what's happening on the system? And part of that is because of the same abstraction I talked about earlier. Decision makers are so far from actually the endpoint environment to understand even what it means for files to get encrypted, what kind of technologies are involved, what is VSS admin, why do backups get disabled, and the further away, and we use so many complex terms, like I'm sure many of you are familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And again, like an average user looking at that is going to say, what is that? We don't even use words like samples anymore. Like 10 years ago, you would say, oh, I have a malware sample. Now you say, oh, I have 15 IOCs. So we have a lot of cybersecurity jargon. We have a lot of terminology. And as a result, we're quite detached from what's actually happening on the system level. And I think it's important to stay in touch with that, because otherwise you end up with situations like this where you can have very sophisticated defenses, very expensive, and your files still end up getting encrypted in 2 seconds, no problem, by a ransomware made in like 10 minutes. So why is cybersecurity so hard? Part of it is the detection problem. So part of it is a mapping issue. So we have very complex things, like you can see the three-dimensional object in the foreground, and what we're trying to detect is kind of like the 2D thing in the background. So that's like our detection mechanism, and this is the thing we're actually trying to model. Now, for performance reasons, obviously you don't have all the data. Anytime we build a signature, we're trying to detect something, we're trying to simplify what an attacker is doing. And obviously, that restricts a lot of the information we can have. This is the same issue we're going to have with AI models, because we're making selection in terms of what information the AI is using for its decision making, and that's not necessarily all the information. And this is where chaos theory, one of the core concepts of Jurassic Park, comes in. So one of the main things that Jurassic Park discusses, in addition to fractals, is chaos theory. So there are two kinds of systems, essentially. There are linear systems, obviously, kind of like a pendulum. So if you have a simple pendulum, one of the things you can do is you can predict its future position if you know where it is. So you know, at a certain point it's going to move a certain direction, the momentum, the velocity, the direction. It's very easy to predict the behavior of a simple pendulum. Now, if you attach two pendulums, you can no longer predict after a couple oscillations what's going to happen. And this is true of all complex systems, like a pool table. If you have like 15 balls on a pool table and you're trying to take a shot, it's very hard for you to predict what's going to happen, because it's going to change so much depending on the first ball that you strike. Where do you strike it? How is it going to move across the table? How rough is the table? All of these factors come into play. Another classic example that's used in Jurassic Park is weather systems. The butterfly flaps its wings in Peking, and, you have rain instead of sunshine in New York. So weather systems are similar in that they're very complex. You have, so many variables. You have the moisture, you have, air molecules moving. It's a chaotic system. And a lot of, systems are chaotic. And that's what this quote references. Straight linearity, which we have come to take for granted in everything from physics to fiction, simply does not exist. Linearity is an artificial way of viewing the world. Real life isn't a series of interconnected events occurring one after another. Rather, life is a series of encounters in which one event may change those that follow in a wholly unpredictable way. And this is something to keep in mind when you're talking about cybersecurity as well, because we like to think of cybersecurity as a very linear system. The attacker does this, the attacker does that. But in reality, that's not how it works. If an attacker is already at a certain stage, they may not need to go through the rest of the process. Every single event is kind of independent in that sense, and it can influence everything else. So a classic example is you can have the most sophisticated cyber defense mechanism, but if you leave your passwords on the table, none of that really matters. So we need to think more in terms of like the worst case scenarios. And, one of the funny things is when I do cybersecurity tests, a classic defense by most vendors or, most people who are on the blue team side is they will say, well, this is not a fair test of our system because our system assumes that you're going to go through, step 1, 2, and 3. You have to send a phishing email. You have to, then get the user to do this. Then you have to run the code. And if you're not doing all of that, then, it's not an accurate test of system. But, the cyber criminals don't care. They don't have to go through a certain mechanism, especially nowadays. They can literally start anywhere. And now we're going to go back to the fractals I showed you earlier. So you remember that confusing pattern I just played? So every chapter in Jurassic Park has one of these, and it shows this fractal developing in different stages. So as you can see in the fourth iteration, Malcolm mentions that inevitably underlying instabilities begin to appear. And this is the chapter where, Nedry does his thing. And then in the sixth iteration, when the fences finally fail, it's like system recovery may prove impossible. So one of the concepts Jurassic Park references, in addition to chaos theory, is the concept of fractals. And fractals are a very interesting concept. So it's basically the idea that you can repeat a pattern to get a larger result. So think about a mountain, right? So we've all seen mountains. So if you look at a mountain range, it has a certain shape. Now, if you look at a particular peak in that mountain range, if you really zoom in, that peak also looks like a mountain range. It has smaller peaks in it. So the idea in Jurassic Park is patterns repeat. And you can observe this in various trends. So for example, stock market behavior. If you look at stock market behavior for a day, you're going to notice that the behavior is quite similar to, behavior over a month. So this idea of repeating patterns, being able to, predict events in the future is one of the concepts that Jurassic Park leans quite heavily into. So what can we do about all of this from a cybersecurity perspective? And, there's obviously no really simple answers, but one of my favorite answers is this. Doing a lot of testing. So we need to be able to tell what is happening at each stage. And, especially at the endpoint level, the kind of situations that we don't really anticipate. And you can't really tell that without actually, doing the tests. So this is obviously a reference to Portal for those of you who've played the game. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I'll be doing more versions of this in the future, because there's so many concepts in Jurassic Park that are relevant to cybersecurity that I think, I could easily fill another couple of hours talking about them. But I'm going to leave you with time for questions. And I also want to say we will be doing an after event for this particular conference. If any of you want to join that, check out our Discord. That's going to be on screen. With that, we'll head off to questions. Thank you. Oh wow, that's a difficult one. Put me on the spot there. I'll probably go with velociraptors because in the movies they were pretty cool, and they're intelligent, so they're a lot more interesting than the T-Rex. Although I'm probably going to offend a lot of Jurassic Park fans with that answer. Go ahead. Ooh, I was expecting more questions on cybersecurity. Now I'm being treated like I'm getting the grant treatment. Everybody wants to ask me about Jurassic Park like I've actually been there. The funny thing is I actually did my research in this, and we actually have the technology, so to speak. We've extracted like DNA from mammals like, mammoths, for example, because they're preserved in perfect conditions in the Ice Age. In terms of real dinosaurs, I think the real issue is one of the issues that's pointed out in the book and the movies, which is that it's hard to extract enough DNA. Now, the solution that's provided in the book is very realistic, but I don't think we've done that yet, which is extracting, dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes and amber. I think until that happens, we won't have a Jurassic Park. But also, I think it's worth taking the message from the movies, like just because you can and sounds cool, maybe we shouldn't be building a Jurassic Park.
Okay, if there are no more questions,